When we think about childhood adversity or kind of adversity in general, we think about kind of experiences or circumstances or conditions that pose a sense of threat or hardship or burden on whoever we're thinking about. And in our case, we think a lot about the impact of adversity on young children. So it's a sense of threat and a sense of burden or hardship that signals to any person a stress that triggers a stress response. We've known for a long time, and you don't have to be a scientist to come to the conclusion that kind of chronic adversity for children that causes a great deal of stress can't be good for you. And I think before we even get to the science, people appreciate that chronic stress creates a sense of uncertainty and insecurity for children that can certainly create a sense of vulnerability and can result in emotional problems that can be shown in behavior or in the way children are feeling. But what's really important on top of what common sense tells you is that science is helping us understand actually how stress kind of gets into our body, how it gets under the skin, and how it affects brain circuits, and how it affects the immune system and metabolic systems and the cardiovascular system. So our current understanding from a scientific point of view is that chronic adversity and what we call toxic stress can affect learning, it can affect behavior, and over time it can actually affect both physical and mental health, in its most severe cases for a lifetime. When we are stressed, and I should say at this point that stress itself is not a threat if it's not overwhelming. Stress is a normal part of life. So the goal here is not to protect children from any stressful experiences. In fact, that would be bad, because you need to be exposed to adversity and stress in order to learn how to cope with it and develop resilience. So what we're talking about in terms of something to worry about is chronic activation of the stress response system. So what is the stress response system? Stress hormones increase in the bloodstream, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, your inflammatory system is activated, and metabolic changes, your blood sugar goes up. So let's just give some examples of what that means in terms of health consequences. If all of those systems are activated, but they go back to baseline when children feel a sense of security and safety, which is what adults have to provide for them, then there's no reason to worry about long-term consequences. But when the stress system is activated most of the time, in situations of extreme neglect or constant exposure to violence in a war zone or in a very violent environment, when there aren't adults to create a sense of safety and protection for children, then that stress activation continues. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The elevation of inflammation in the body, the kind of activation of the immune system, an inflammatory response, actually accelerates atherosclerosis. So for children who have chronic inflammation related to stress, it increases the risk that they're going to get heart disease at a younger age. Chronic activation of the stress system leads to elevations in your blood sugar, which can produce insulin resistance over time and make you more at risk for developing diabetes. This is on top of the usual things we think about, like behavior problems, emotional difficulties, anxiety, depression. So all of these are potential problems. So what's important about this is it's kind of opening up the black box of something we've known for a long time but haven't understood how it happens, which is children who've experienced severe hardship and threat just have more problems as they grow up, more problems learning, more problems managing their behavior, more problems with their emotions, and more problems with health, and ultimately don't live as long. These are the kind of the disparities we see related to poverty, violence, racism, social isolation. And what the science is telling us is it's kind of opening up that black box, letting us look inside our bodies and say, well, this is how it happens. It's not just a mystery, that there are biological changes inside our bodies that explain why this extreme hardship or adversity or threat actually affects our physical and mental health, as well as our behavior and learning. When we think about the impact of adversity on children, it's not only the level of the adversity or the reaction on the part of the child to the adversity, but timing is very important. Where in the life course does this happen? There are certain kinds of exposures that during pregnancy can cause serious problems because of the sensitivity, the critical periods when certain things are developing. So, for example, exposure to rubella, German measles, during a particular part in pregnancy can result in problems later after a baby is born in mental retardation, heart disease, sensory problems, pretty severe disabilities from exposure just during a sensitive period of a few weeks during the pregnancy. If you get rubella after you're born, it's kind of a viral illness. You don't feel too well, but the consequences are trivial, so timing is really important. We know that different parts of the brain go through their critical periods at different times, and when brain circuits are being made, at the time that they're being constructed, that is their critical period, and the circuits are most susceptible to outside environmental influences. If the environment is supportive and responsive and safe and positive, you build strong circuits for those particular parts of the brain. If the environment is threatening, unstable, unpredictable, and it activates stress responses, just at that time those circuits are being made, the circuits could be weakened. And then when they're completed, you have weak circuits for that part of the brain for the rest of your life. You can't go back and redo the circuits, so then you have to accommodate and you have to make adaptations as you get older. So all experiences are particularly important during the critical period that kind of biological processes are being made. The immune system is another good example. All of us, our immune system is what protects us against infection. And our immune system is developing the ability to respond to different infections. And some of these basic components of the immune system are laid down very early in life, in infancy, in the first weeks, the first months of life. And then you have an effect, same thing with metabolic systems that may affect how you metabolize what you eat, and whether you're more or less likely to have problems gaining weight or losing weight as you get older. A lot of those metabolic patterns are established early in life, which is why timing is so important, and particularly why exposure to adversity when children are very young is such a serious problem. Many people may look at this and say, well, babies don't really understand what's going on. And even if they have some sense of what's going on, none of us remember things from when we were very young, so this can't really have long-term consequences. So from a conscious memory point of view, that might be true, but from a biological point of view, it's exactly the opposite of the truth, because many of these systems early on are influenced by adversity, influenced by threat, and we may not have a conscious memory, but the body remembers. There may be biological memories that affect our health and our behavior, years or decades later. So timing is really important. And as a general principle, early, getting things right the first time when they're developing is always better than trying to fix things later. And prevention of disruptions is much more effective than trying to remediate them later. So it's never too late to intervene when problems become apparent later, but you never get as good an outcome as you would have gotten if you had done it right the first time.